Here's what you should know before buying from Oak Street Bootmakers. I've been wearing the two most popular boots for literal years. My first review was after like a week of wear 6 years ago on this boot. And I'm gonna tell you about how they're made, how they fit, who they're for, why they cost more than so many other American-made boots, and how they've changed since I bought my first pair, because a lot of information online about this company is out of date, including my old video. So you're in for a double review here. They're gonna try to make not twice as long as a normal video. Looking at the brand's #1 bestseller, this exact boot, the trench boot in natural Chromexcel leather, modeled after World War I trench boots. And its extremely popular brother, the field boot, that's modeled after World War II boots, and which I picked up last year and I just beat up on a trip around Mexico. They brand these boots as everyday boots, which is a great way to think about them. Some call them city boots, and they're a great example of why you, in fact, do not need to be a lumberjack or an infantryman to wear boots, because that stability can help for some people to limit foot pain when you're on your feet all day. Walking being an activity that every person with feet does, it's a good idea for anyone to get boots. I stake my whole reputation on that. Oak Street does a terrific job of making super high quality city boots that are great for anyone who is bipedal and who doesn't want to dress flamboyantly or ostentatiously. It's just like good materials, low-key handsome looks that improve with time. And Oak Street makes boots for human beings that just look cool, and they're not pretending to be a really heavy and expensive like lumberjack boot from the Pacific Northwest. One of the most commonly asked questions about Oak Street Bootmakers is what's the difference between the trench boot and the field boot? And the answer is not that complicated. Trench boot is World War I, field boot is World War II. I am not saying these are replicas of the boots that army soldiers wore for those wars, but those boots are in their DNA. They're the ancestors of these boots. And the differences are really almost all aesthetic. The trench boot's a little bit taller. It comes with leather laces, while this comes with flat wax laces, which I do really want to emphasize because as I was shooting outside, the leather lace here broke. So that is a risk that happens with leather laced boots. But then again, these boots are like 7 years old, so they had a pretty good run. Another one is the trench boot has a 2-piece counter and backstay. These are 2 separate pieces, whereas the field is like 1 piece, like a nice big T. And also the trench boot has a 360-degree Goodyear welt, and the field boot has a 270-degree Goodyear welt. So 270-degree welts, it just means like the heel is like a little bit sleeker looking. You know, some people like it purely from an aesthetic standpoint, but there's no difference as far as durability or water resistance or what's harder to make or anything like that. I confess, when I first started doing videos 7-8 years ago, I thought there was a difference. There's not really a difference, it's just about look. The other difference is the field boot is a bit more expensive. It has a bit more finishing, which ups the price. They hand brush the welt here to color it, and they hammer some brass tacks into the bottom here, you see in the middle, to mimic what they did with the World War II boot. And you also get different soles as well. So with the trench boot, you can pick between a softer and more breathable leather sole, which I really like, or a gripper and more rainproof and expensive day-night rubber sole. While the field boot comes with, this is like the Vibram 700 nitrile cork sole, which is a mixture of rubber and cork, like the N1 field shoe that this boot is modeled after, although again, this is not a replica. All right, now let's talk about Oak Street Bootmakers and their leathers. But a really cool thing I like about Oak Street and that I touched on is that they do classic really well. So they'll also regularly come out with like limited releases, but it's never anything really crazy like pink leather or something like that. Like they clearly work really hard to find cool new leathers for limited editions of their boots, which are always different, but always on brand. The kettle leather boots from these guys, lots of vegetable tan leathers from Italy's Badalassi Carlo, an extra waxy Seidel leather called Domain. It is mostly boot nerds who can tell the difference between this kind of stuff, but that's all right, because it's a good balance, this brand of like being good for boot nerds, but also pretty much anyone when they come to their website and they see the range of leathers. Now the staple leathers for these models, and the boot you've probably got in mind, is Chromexcel. For those who don't know, Chromexcel, it's the go-to for casual boots at like any price, like $200 Thursday boots to 4-figure Japanese boots. The Chromexcel boot that a brand comes out with is usually the most popular version of whatever model is using it. It's just a good balance of tough and flexible and comfortable and hardy. It ages really nicely. Chromexcel comes in a few colors, brown and black, and there's a color 8, which is kind of like burgundy. But for whatever reason, for Oak Street, this color here is the one that does the best for them. So the trench boot in natural Chromexcel, which means it's undyed Chromexcel, there's no pigment or anything here, it is far and away their best seller. This is footage of this boot when it was like a week or 2 old. This is after a good few years of wear, and it's been conditioned a whole bunch, and it gets darker. I've seen natural Chromexcel that's 10 years old, and you could swear it was just like a brown leather boot. It does age dynamically. It changes as you wear it in. It's sort of like fading your jeans. Meanwhile, the original World War II boot that this is modeled after was called the Boondocker, and it was made with rough out leather, which you see here, this is actually this exact same leather, turned inside out. So that's what rough out means. It's not suede, it looks like it, but rough out is thicker. And the reason that rough out got so popular in military situations, it's very resistant to scratches. It's more or less scratch proof and you don't really need to condition it, whereas you do want to condition Chromexcel regularly. Probably just like once or twice a year, but still the rough out you don't really need to do anything to. Some guys spray Chromexcel rough out with Sophia Renovator from time to time, not the cream, the spray. If you're okay with that darkening this a little bit, you can do that if you want, but I would just encourage you to just keep wearing them and marvel at how well it goes without any care. I've rubbed these rough out boots with a brass brush a couple times to try and get some dirt out. They do honestly need like a little bit of a shampoo, like a suede shampoo to get looking spick and span, but I don't care. But if I wanted to, I could get these looking pretty good with a suede brush. This happens actually a lot with my rough out boots. You'll get it gets smoother around the heel because this area gets wear. I'm not 100% sure if that's from the outside or just the friction from the inside. But if you get the rough out boot, there's a good chance on the inside of the heel, it'll get like a little bit smooth here. How are they made? This is why they are $500-ish boots. The trench boot with a leather sole is about $462 if you have the cheapest option. The Daynet ones, which these are $488. Trench boots with cap toes exist and cost a little more than that. And these field boots are $518. The sole is twice the price of the soles that the trench boot gets used with. Plus it has that extra finishing that I mentioned. Now, first of all, about the price, those prices have barely changed in 10 years. These boots have gone up like $20. So that's a good sign that Oak Street is not into gouging their customers, I think. But if you want to know why Oak Street is $150 more than like say Red Wings Blacksmith, which is also made in the USA with a resolable Goodyear belt construction, it kind of requires a lot of knowledge about the boot making process that I'm going to try and condense and communicate clearly here. Comparing this to the Blacksmith, the Red Wing Blacksmith, in addition to the Blacksmith not having a midsole, so Oak Street has twice the sole, and Red Wing uses less highly regarded leather uppers from their own tannery that they own, Oak Street's boots are more handmade than even American-made Goodyear belted boots. Now, I'm very aware that the word handmade has basically lost all meaning, so I'm going to specify some rare and unusual elements in the creation of Oak Street boots. The big one is that all of Oak Street's boots are hand-lasted. Most brands, I'm showing you Carmina in Spain right now, very expensive boots. They use machines to stretch leather over the last, the foot-looking mold that determines the fit and shape of a boot. Doing it by hand requires more skill and time, and the takeaway is, officially, it makes for a better fit. Other touches that are rare here include the stitching being done by eye instead of by computer. So with new Oak Streets, you might see where it's been marked on the leather to help the maker follow the lines with the sewing machine. A person does the clicking, which is selecting the bits of leather to be used for different parts of the boot. And also after the hand lasting, the boot is left on its last for a week so that it better forms to the final determined shape. Other brands I've been to, this is Trickers in England, they'll speed up the process by putting them into like a boot sauna. Look, does the average person notice a difference between the fit of a hand-lasted boot and a non-hand-lasted boot? It's unlikely. There is more skill involved in making these, and that's why they cost more. So it's not like a made up price difference. The sizing. It is famously tricky on Oak Street. Best exemplified by this poll I took on my Instagram you should follow that was perfectly split on whether or not you should size down with Oak Street. This model, this last, has an unusually roomy toe. And if you haven't worn these boots, you might not have even noticed that just about every boot out there on the market leaves your pinky resting against the inside edge of it. Because most boots have more almond-shaped toes, it's generally considered more fashionable, but when you get into Oak Street boots or a boot with a nice round toe like this, you'll wonder why you ever put up with it. The point being that Oak Street, it's not a really bulbishly big wide round toe, but this last, it does have a roomy toe, which is nice, but also it's why some people are not totally sure what their size is. When I asked Oak Street, I gave them a call why they made an unfashionably round toe. They said, look, your feet are bigger at the end of the day than they are in the morning. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't know. They swell throughout the day, your feet. And they wanted to make boots that fit you when you come home. That's half the reason people get sore feet at the end of the day. It's because their feet get progressively more cramped throughout the day. So while the heel is very narrow in a good way, and it's very secure, just like any other boot, the toe is roomier than most boots. So if you have a narrow foot, or if you do just want a more almond-shaped boot, they have the Lakeshore boot, so like that's fine, you have that option. Most boot brands, they tell you to go down a half size from your true size, right? So I'm an 11.5 in most sneakers and on the Brannock foot measuring device. Just about all of my boots are size 11. So, you know, Red Wing and Thursday and Wolverine. Oak Street, however, tells you to get your normal size. So the number on my Oak Street is a half size bigger than all of my other boots, my Red Wings and Thursdays and so on. So I'm 11.5 in these. I actually tried both 11 and 11.5. I would not have complained if I'd gotten an 11. I wouldn't have bothered sending it back. You will hear guys say that they sized down on Oak Street and they didn't notice that they'd ordered the wrong size because it felt fine. Also on that note, some people complain that Oak Street doesn't do wide sizes, and that's a fair complaint, but you should know this last will fit an E-width foot. And I think if you go up a half size from the size I recommend, I think you'd be fine if you're like a double E or maybe even a triple E, right? Other changes that have been made to this boot since I reviewed them, they only started hand lasting them in 2020. So the last is called the Elston Last. And if you saw my very old Oak Street review, you would hear me complaining that the foot tends to slide forward in those boots. And that's because Oak Street used to have a leather sock liner in this boot that was too slippery for folks. So they took that out and they readjusted the last to remove the allowance of space for that liner. So they added like about 1 millimeter to the toe depth and they brought the toe spring down a little bit on these boots. Because a fiberglass shank, which keeps the boot more stable, it's a piece of like usually metal right here. So they swapped it out with a steel shank. One more thing, during the pandemic, there was a cork shortage. And so they had to use foam for a little bit in like sort of like the midsole area for these boots. So for a little while, you might have seen some guys online whining about artificial materials on like old Reddit posts and stuff. There is one artificial material in these though that does bug some people, and let's do the pros and cons of this. That's how you wrap up videos like this, and I'll mention them in the cons section. The pros. I'm so crazy about the wide toe on these boots. It is so much more comfortable than the more fashionable boots. These are also made in the USA and with the industry's highest quality leathers. Chromexcel is the most beloved boot leather there is, but also when they get in other leathers, it's from like world famous tanneries like Mariam's Horsebutt in Italy or you know, Seidel, like really well regarded places. So whatever they put out, it's not like a cheap leather they got somewhere because they could do a funny color or something. It's always really, really good. Like I've been following them for like 7 years. The brand has like an insatiable hunger to find unique and cool leathers. I really love the unpretentious design. It's like the casual boot that's not dressy, but it's very thoughtfully made. They really aren't that expensive for that amount of labor and for this quality materials. Of course, it needs to be worth it to you, but like market-wise, for what goes into these, it's okay, the price. It's not ridiculous. The cons. I appreciate the average person won't notice that hand-lasted boots fit better. There are no speed hooks up the top with either of these. It's very cheap to swap those out with a cobbler. And I honestly prefer that they don't have speed hooks because I like how it keeps the laces in place, because speed hooks, they can fall out during the day. They technically have no wide widths. I did mention, I think you can, up to a double E can work it out with this brand, but they do not fit a massive variety of feet. Again, the sizes stop at 13 as well. Lastly, if you are a boot guy, the kind of guy that likes the Goodyear Welt subreddit, you might not like the fact that the toe and the heel counter here are stiffened with Celastic, which is impregnated with a plasticizer that almost every boot in the world has, for just to give the toe and the heel some shape, to keep the toe from collapsing around your feet, that kind of stuff. Some guys who buy boots at this price point don't like that, and they would prefer leather stiffeners, which would make them more expensive, but that just doesn't matter to everyone. Lastly, the toe is round. It's not that round, and I prefer it as an alternative to almost every other boot's almond toe when I get sick of those. It does make it more casual though. I think that's an upside. Again, you can get the Lakeshore boot if the toe is like a big deal breaker for you. This is a pretty versatile, just quite casual boot. All right, man, that's like my 6-year review of Oak Street Bootmakers. I really do like this brand, even though like they're not outrageously weird looking. They just do like classic really well. They appeal to a lot of guys. It's a real sweet spot of craftsmanship and like classic looks. Let me know in the comments below if you got a pair, what you think. If I missed out anything in this review, I spent forever writing it. And subscribe here as well if you want to see more videos on casual, durable stuff. That's what I like to do here. I'll catch you for the next one.